same here. It depends which kind of beach you're on in Thorpe Bay. How
Yeah.
always one where it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Welcome as people are coming in. I'm just keeping an eye on the waiting room while we have people join us. So we'll give it a few more minutes and then we can kick off. I'm just going to mute for the moment while we do that. Do feel free to chat amongst yourselves, however, while we're waiting. Otherwise, it's a bit like a doctor's waiting room.
Yeah.
With no music in the background. There we go. Thank you.
That's made us much more relaxed, hasn't it? Yes.
I'll just give it another minute and then we'll start and people will drift in, I'm sure.
And drift out, no doubt.
And drift out, no doubt. Yes.
I can see that someone is called Anna, but there's two of them there, and one of them who is crunching. Has he got a name, do you think? Because everyone else has got their own name attached to them.
Well, that's okay. I can. Anna is and I can only see one window.
Yeah.
I'm Quentin.
Hello, Quentin.
Hi. Sorry, you caught me. It's lunchtime for me.
It's lunchtime. You know, usually in the real world, when we do these things, it's about lunch, sharing lunch. So, you know, the fact that you're eating is completely fine. Crunch away.
No, I finished crunching now. Everyone's safe.
For those of you, quite a few new faces. So, for those of you who haven't joined before, this is an event that until May used to happen in the flesh. It was all about sharing lunch casually and then having a sharing from one or more artists afterwards. However, since May we have been doing it this way. So we usually go for about an hour. I think any longer than that starts to get a bit wearing on Zoom, I think. But we'll see how it goes. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Richard Nankivell. And I'm going to hand over to Hugh. By the way, this is being recorded. So if you have anything you decide that you shouldn't have said, you can always let me know and I will see what I can do about that. We usually publish the video afterwards on the website, and also feel free to use the chat. So those, again, if you're not used to using Zoom, just click on the chat button and you can chat away. So we have a message from Peony saying, unfortunately, she's going to have to leave early this week, but that's all right. Stay as long as you can, Peony. And I'm going to hand over to Hugh. Welcome, welcome. So just by way of introduction, I've known Hugh for a long time now, it feels like, pretty much since you moved down here to the southwest, I think, and always a fan of what Hugh gets up to musically, and otherwise I think that for me, Hugh's music is always about people, and that's what makes it special for me. So I'm just going to hand over and let Hugh take it on.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, lovely to be here. I haven't been to a First Friday for about 4.5 years, I think. So, and actually we were going to be doing one in April. We were going to be doing a live one, but it was the first one that got cancelled. You said from May, but I think the April one got cancelled, didn't it?
The April one got cancelled, and then we started online in May. Yeah.
That's what we were going to be doing. I must just say, I moved to Devon 14 years ago, and from Huddersfield, where Bob, who I'll introduce you to in a little bit, lives now. And I found it quite hard to engage with an artistic community down here. I found I had quite a lot of rejections, but Richard was somebody who definitely didn't reject me. He was one of the very few people who said, "Welcome, Hugh. What do you do? How can we support it? And how can we share it?" So that felt really lovely. And I've always been very grateful to Richard and Nancy for that, their kind of openness, which feels really nice. Yes, thank you for giving it a thumbs up, Emma. It feels really lovely and that you're still here kind of sharing work with different people. So that's very lovely. And I did a big project with Ownhead Arts, which was a project called Tri-Parks, which is about 3 different national parks. So Dartmoor, Exmoor and Northumberland National Park, each having 2 artists in residence. And so that's really, I kind of developed quite a good relationship with Richard and at that time, which has continued since. But today I'm part of a trio, which is myself and Bob, who I was just saying from Huddersfield, and Richard Thorpe there, who is a visual artist in Torquay. And we have been working on a project which opens today in Tor Abbey, which is very lovely. It's really kind of lovely that there are still things happening, and that you can go and you can see some of Rick's work and listen to some of my music and see the film that Bob has made. And it's all there and available, and it's going to be on until the 28th of November. So so do book, and it's quite nice, Tor Abbey, if any of you have ever been there. Just give us a wave if you have. So some people have, yeah, it's great. They're working on a very nice system at the moment where, you know, you can book, I think it's every 10 or 15 minutes a starting point, and you have to go around the gallery in a certain route, and you're only allowed 3, or if you're in your bubble of 6. But it seems to be very nice, and it was really lovely being there this morning, setting it up and seeing a lot of people going around the Abbey, because of course it's not a very pleasant day for doing anything else outside. So it's filled with people, which is great. And do come down, because Tor Abbey has had an interesting refit and has a very wonderful permanent exhibition of both historical and artistic works. So we've got an exhibition which is called Torquay Rewilding, which was a little online kind of an ongoing project that Rick and I did early on in lockdown. Rick will talk a little bit about his background to it in a minute, but for me, it was I saw a painting by Rick. He put it up on Facebook, and I wrote a song for it. I thought that would be quite good, and that's partly because I knew I couldn't go and actually see anybody else at all. So I thought, how can I kind of engage with different people? So I saw this one painting, and I did and I wrote a song for it. And then
Yes,
Rick did some more paintings, and I did some more songs. And it's a mutual thing where we ended up a whole series of different paintings and songs. And I think we definitely engaged and inspired each other and realized it was a project as it developed. And what these paintings were different animals, mostly from East Africa, but within a Torquay setting. And it was very lovely. So the first one that Rick did was a humpback whale, not necessarily East African, but all the others were. So there was the kudu, cheetah, rhinos, camels, elephants, pangolin, and all in different settings that I knew really well. It was really very lovely to kind of be able to see these things. And it happened at the same time as there was, I'm sure you remember, there was that kind of natural rewilding, which felt very exciting and optimistic for some of us at the time. Do you remember when the goats took over Llangollen? And And in fact, interestingly enough, my partner Caroline, she was down on the Tor Abbey Sands one morning, and a deer jumped out from behind Visto Lounge in the centre of Torquay, jumped into the sea and swam towards Livermead. And we've never had a deer in the middle of Torquay before. And that was really did feel like we were kind of entering a slightly different world. And so the songs kind of sometimes talked about those kinds of things. There's one, the pangolin one, is about being scapegoats, which, you know, there was all that stuff talking about, you know, were pangolins to blame? Of course, pangolins weren't to blame for COVID-19. They just might have been the creature that we engaged with in terms of a difficult farming practice that might have been where it came from. So some of them became like that. Some of them became very humorous, and some of them became historical. Some of them geographical, and there's a few little starting points. One of them was that just before this whole thing started, I went to a funeral. One of my uncles died. I went to a funeral, and they played some Flanders and Swan at his funeral. I hadn't heard any Flanders and Swan for ages, and I saw my mother immediately afterwards, after the funeral, and she's got a vinyl LP that I was listening to when I was between the ages of 2 and 10, and we hadn't listened to it for ages. And in fact, her record player didn't work, so I had to fix the record player to play. And it was really lovely that we got to play some Flanders and Swan songs, and I was thinking about those. So for those people who don't know, they were a couple of songwriting performers, mostly in the 60s, and they made 2 albums of very wonderful songs. One song's called I'm a Gnu, which is just an animal-related one, and they're always kind of funny. And they sort of have their music is not especially interesting. It's one of those things where they have a kind of their music is to hold the song, if that makes sense. You know, music on its own for a Flanders and Swan song isn't especially interesting, but the songs are wonderful. I hope that makes sense. And so I was quite aware that my songs definitely started like Flanders and Swan. And after I'd done 3 or 4, I thought, the music's not very interesting. I think I should a little bit. So I kind of suddenly started thinking, oh yeah, they're all in 4/4. They're all in a kind of major. They're all a bit rumty-tumty-tum. What about if I had one in 5/4 or 11/8, or did something interesting with some music rather than just have the piano going in the background? So, but what I'd like to do first of all is I'm going to play you the first picture that Rick did, which is the Humpback Whale, which was the second song that I did. So you can just have a kind of listen to this. But this is very much not just my song and Rick's picture, but Bob has made a film. And what's very lovely is that we get to see the picture for the whole length of the song, which is very rare, because usually in an art gallery, I remember when I worked with the National Gallery about 30 years ago, and I worked with the head of education, and he said, people in an art gallery look at a painting for less than 0.2 of a second. That's the average time that people actually look at a picture for. And I think what's been interesting on this one is that as Bob's made the films, you know, he's made them the duration of the song. He lets us, he takes us in, we scan over it, we see the kind of real detail of that. And the last thing I'll say before I play them is that I went to Vienna last year, partly to look at some Bruegel paintings. I've been really interested in Bruegel and that era of painting. And I discovered a really interesting thing in the Kunsthistorische Museum, which is that in the 19th century, art students used to go in at 9 o'clock in the morning and come out at 3:30, having only looked at one picture. They would sit for 5 or 6 hours looking at that picture, and they would read it. Apparently they used to, with the Bruegel in particular, they would read it like we might read a novel. They would kind of look in absolute detail. I think there's something very wonderful about that time spent with investigating kind of art. So let's hope that the share screen can work, and I'm going to play you. So this is the Humpback Whale. Where are they now? I thought I had them already lined up, which I think I do. Let me just, please bear with me. I'm take that out again. Here we go. Yes, here we are. Optimize screen. Right. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Great. And here I'll play it then. So this is the humpback whale, Rick's picture, and my song, and Bob's film. Rick called me up to say there's a humpbacked whale in the bay. So I put my pants and trousers on. So this is an action song, and you can pretend to put on the items of clothing as they're sung out. Or you could do it for real in real time, but you'd need to start naked and have a set of clothes including pants, trousers, socks, shoes, t-shirt, snorkel, backpack, cycle, helmet, etc. all ready to hand. So if you like, I could play some music while you go and get everything ready. And today's song is in C sharp Lydian, and if you want to join in, the notes that I'm playing are C sharp, D sharp, E sharp, F double sharp, G sharp, A sharp, B sharp, and C sharp. Rick called me up to say there's a humpbacked whale in the bay. So I put my pants and trousers on. You know what to do here. Rick said it again. There's a humpbacked whale and it's heading straight for Paynton. So I put my socks and shoes on. Rick said, hurry up with your clothes, the whale's now heading towards Hope's Nose. So I put my shirt and jumper on. Hope's Nose is the northerly point of the bay, made of limestone. It's where Johnny Cruise goes fishing. And then Rick called and said, it's turned round and going towards Berry Head. So I put my Macintosh on. Berry Head is to the south of Brixham. It's where the Reverend Henry Light composed Abide With Me. Which doesn't quite work in the Lydian scale, as you hear. Rick then made a final plea. Look, the humpback whale is heading straight into Torquay. So I strapped on my parachute and high-vis jacket. And then Rick called and said, it's going up the River Fleet, which has actually now become Fleet Street. I pulled on my goggles and my riding spurs. Caroline kindly lent me hers. I donned my deerstalker hat and some spare silk gloves. I found them in a box of Audrey's stuff. I was nearly ready to go out the house when I remembered the situation. I'd used up my daily ration of excursions. I'd already been out once today. I couldn't go and see the humpbacked whale, but fortunately Rick said that's okay. I'll paint a picture for you and post it up online. Thanks, I said, and he did. There you go. That was an early one, and I just wanted to say that as well as the kind of Flanders and Swan, a lot of the work that I've been doing in the last 5 years has been either with early years and with people with dementia. And so I was very conscious, as well as not being able to go and see friends like Rick for a walk along the seafront, I also, and this was really keen, I wasn't able to go to care homes. And that was a really big thing because it was very difficult. I'm sure that you can imagine, and you know those stories. It was very hard not to be able to go and see those. So I was also making music to think to try and relate to those sort of people. And I sent this song to Lorraine George, who's the childminding support worker in Torquay, you know, and she and some of her childminding groups responded really nicely to these songs. And what's been very lovely is having Bob to kind of add to them, because now they've become these little kind of stories, and it's really nice to be able to kind of see that detail in them. What else did I want to say a little bit about them? Yeah, so for me, they became quite an encapsulating thing. So you heard in that one, I told you a little bit about some of the things that go on in Berry Head, like, you know, within the bay, like the fact that Abide With Me was written in Brixham. And so some of the songs have other little kind of bits of historical or geographical connection in. And then Rick and I started getting asked by people, could we do specific things? So like the Geopark said, could I do something that was kind of factually accurate about one of the... And then Rick got a request to paint a lion in someone's garden, which he did, because it was great that he had that kind of request. But actually, we kind of discussed whether we should do the kind of factually accurate ones. And we thought, no, we should probably just stick to what we're enjoying, because nobody was telling, you know, no one was telling us. It was really lovely for me that I never knew the next animal and I never knew the location. And it was really nice for me to kind of be able to think about what that was, and where it was kind of where he'd set it, so then I could kind of make a kind of connection with that. So I think I think that's probably enough from me, really, at the moment. It'd be quite nice just to ask, we were going to play another song, but to ask Rick and Bob just to talk perhaps a little bit about what they, you know, because Rick's got a very interesting different kind of background to the stories from his perspective. So I think I'm going to pass on to Rick. If you want to say something, Rick, that'd be great.
I'll try.
Yeah.
I haven't prepared anything, but it's been really interesting listening to you talking about it, because I've learned, you know, stuff that I hadn't heard you say. But yeah, no, I mean, it's funny because the germ of the idea actually started quite a long time ago, probably a couple of years ago, when I started thinking about how it would look if, you know, suddenly there was a herd of antelope kind of grazing outside the Princess Theatre. But it did take lockdown to kind of give the whole thing the kick up the arse that it needed, to actually start painting. And I must say, you know, looking at the film there, if I'd known that they were going to come under such close scrutiny, I don't think I would have even picked up the paintbrush in the first place. So it was a good job, you know, that I happened the way it did, that I'd actually finished all the painting before Bob made his lovely film, because some of those, you know, each brush stroke is coming under such scrutiny now, isn't it? And you know, some of them I kind of cringe a bit, because I think, oh my goodness, I could have painted that so much better. But anyway, yeah, no, it's been a fantastic project to be involved in, and it'd be interesting to see where it goes from here. But like I say, I haven't really prepared anything to say about the pictures. If anyone's got any questions, I'd be quite happy to try and answer them.
I think I'm just going to jump in there, not to ask you a question, Rick, but just to say that one of the interesting things that we discovered, and I had a really nice little chat with Richard Paval about this, was that, as Rick said, you know, if he'd known that they were going to be scrutinized, and then in an exhibition, and then, you know, on a film, because Bob's made it's a 50-minute long film with all of the different pictures in, if he'd known that, he might have worked differently. But on the other hand, one of the connections is that my songs are written quite quickly. Rick's paintings are done relatively quickly. They're not oil paintings, they're watercolors.
Yeah.
And we sort of discovered that, in fact, me to write a kind of instant song and Rick to do a painting take about the same length of time, which was quite a kind of interesting, that kind of process. And I also think the same. You know, when I came back to sending them to Bob, I thought, oh, I should have edited that. I stumble on there's a wrong note there. But I kind of left them in because it felt that was the kind of nature of it. And there is something quite interesting about that instant work, because Rick is going to do one more painting, and it's going to be an oil painting, isn't it? Your kind of finale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's going to take longer, and I'm going to try and forget about the whole, film song thing as I do it, because otherwise I might be too inhibited about the whole thing. But I guess, I don't know whether that's just something that happens to painters or me in particular as some kind of flawed personality trait. I guess, yeah, no, it's going to be fine.
I think just before we pass on to Bob to talk about the little films and show a couple more, is that one of the nice things has been about a kind of discussion about art that I hadn't particularly engaged with before. So what Rick and I've had a lot of interesting sharings of stuff, and one of the things he recommended to me, which has been quite transformative, is the Christopher Neave book, The Unquiet Landscape. I don't know if any of you know that, about British art. It's a kind of astonishing book at kind of what the relationship with these artists with their landscape and with where they live is. I'll write it in the chat, but I found it a really revelatory book. In fact, I've already bought it for 3 other people. And another friend and I are trying to think, should we have a trip around Britain when we're allowed to, where we just stop off and kind of go and look at some of these pictures. And then I'd just read the History of the World in 10.5 chapters, Julian Barnes, quite an old book, but there's an amazing chapter in there about the creation of the Raft of the Medusa, the Jericho picture. And that had been really interesting to me, again, about creativity and how and why we create stuff. And I shared that with Rick, and he'd not come across that before, and it made him rethink, how art is made. And so we've had a very interesting set of collaborations and conversations. And I think I'll bring Bob in now, because what's been interesting for that is that, Rick's sort of saying, yes, when you get a filmmaker in, it means we look at the work in a very different way. And I've really, really loved that, being able to kind of look in detail at the pictures, but also the way that Bob's been able to tell a story with some of them. And Bob worked with me and Richard on a project a decade ago, which is very nice, kind of reconnecting us. I don't think you've seen Richard for 10 years, have you? So yeah, do you want me to play the film, or do you want to talk first, Bob?
Shall I talk a bit first?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk a bit first and then see how we feel. So Hugh, I met up with Hugh 3 weeks ago on holiday on an outside socially distanced picnic on his birthday, and he said, and I knew about the project with Rick before then, because I get his missives over email, and they said, we want to do some sort of film to go with it. Are you interested? And of course, when Hugh Nankivell makes an offer, you say yes immediately, because there's always something interesting down the road. And so at this point, so that was 3 weeks ago. I got the materials last Monday, Tuesday. So I've put this 50-minute piece together in just over, it's sort of 7 days or so. So I'm absolutely full of these pictures and music, which is kind of fantastic, and kind of overawing as well. And when he originally said, do you want, it's something with this, with the songs and the pictures, and I thought it would be, I don't know, I imagined something quite simple, I guess, and I hadn't really reckoned with the complexity that was ahead in terms of looking at these 2 artists' materials. Obviously, there's a relationship which developed between them over months. That the first was response, and then the first song was response to the picture, and eventually, there was more. As Hugh said, the things developed. It's really interesting that there's more. thematic. I don't want to call it depth, because I don't want to say that the earlier songs are any more deep or less deep than the rest of them. But there's I guess there's a greater melancholia as you go through the songs, and very sort of, and at times feels very poignant. And my immediate sort of reactions to the paintings was just the beauty of the color work, and a lot of the, you know, aside from the animals, which are great, you know, the silverbacks hanging out on Babbacombe Cliff Railways, I think a fantastic image. But there's a lot of the textural work in Rick's paintings, you know, and he's saying about, oh, I could have done that better, and it amazes me how he does what he does at that size. You know, we're talking about A4 paintings, which I'm then blowing up to. I've been working on a 23-inch monitor, and then I'm blowing up, you know, maybe less than an inch square to that 23-inch monitor. I'm bringing in that close. You know, there's a lion's head, which is, you know, you've got this, and it's like this big, and then I blow it up to this, and it's, yeah, utterly fantastic. And so my my interaction has been as an intermediary, it seems to me, between Rick and Hugh, and there are just points where I've sat over the last week or so cheering as things emerge between the songs and the music and the pictures. So you saw in The Humpback Whale, there's that moment where there's the line about, I realised the situation, you get the and you get the rise of the whale, and I was just like, yes, look at that, that's amazing, I'm so happy. And there are different times where that happens. There's a stampede of wildebeest at one point. There's the way that the butterflies move around the tower becomes very important. And you know, and following different, and being able to follow different things in Rick's paintings with the reframing. Basically it's rostrum camera on a computer, but so being able to follow light. There's one of a kudu in Tor Abbey Gardens, I think, and there's this beautiful light from the top right hand corner which comes across onto a bank, and I followed that across, and it's just a joy. What an utter joy to be able to engage with it in that, with that intensity. Yeah, and trying to, and as I went through, I think this is the last thing I'm going to say, is that as I went through, what I realized was that I was basically sticking my oar in more and more as it went through. As I became more confident with what my role was, I'd start to throw more things in, and you know, and just be a bit kind of cheekier about it, to the point where I'm kind of putting text on screen, which is kind of something to do with Hugh singing, but is a kind of counter balance to it, but a kind of tongue-in-cheek reinterpretation of what he's written, you know. Does that sound about right, Hugh?
Lovely. Yeah.
Can I say something? Yeah, I find it really interesting and good, you know, that you've actually enjoyed doing it, Bob, because I was imagining, you know, the length of time it was taken to do this, and that, you know, it must be a bit of a chore, but it sounds like you, you know, you did enjoy it, and it's really good that you got more cheeky with it, because I guess, you know, that involvement then became, it became a really important aspect of the film, I think, you know, because it's become something, as Hugh and I have talked about quite a lot recently, you know, that the whole thing kind of has taken off onto a different level with the addition of the film.
Mm, mm, mm.
in response to how, to how I feel about seeing them on a different scale. I think it's great to see them blown up from A4 to, to much bigger than that, because I've learned something about watercolor painting from that, which is that the more spontaneous the marks and the brush strokes are, the better they look blown up. And are the bits that I worked on for too long. So, I'm from now on, I'm going to be a lot more freer and spontaneous. So, I've picked up something which is really nice, and probably is going to inform my painting from now on, certainly.
Amazing.
Great. Well,
Back, Bill.
Richard just said, let's do another 5 minutes, which is just kind of perfect, because we're going to show you one other film. And yeah, I was just going to say one other thing that just before I show the film, from what Bob said, which is that he talked about, how sometimes the paintings and the songs tell him what to do. So there's a lovely bit in the one you just saw, the Humpback Whale, where he put the notes up the hill on Rock Walk, and it's just like, here's the scale, and it goes up this hill here. And it reminded me of, I've written quite a lot of music with the poet Peter Oswald, where I set his poems, and quite often I'll get them and the words will just tell me what to do musically. It's really, really interesting how you just sit down and you think, oh yeah, it goes up here, it slows down here, it's got a complicated accompaniment here. It was really interesting how sometimes you get stuff that does that, and Bob was saying exactly the same. So as Rick just said, yes, we know that it's taking Bob a long time, but he's kind of enjoying it because he's kind of finding little things within it to do. So so here is, I'll see if I can do it again, is this one is called Pangolin on Tor Abbey, which it wasn't the very end where I had got even more kind of, yes, further away from the first one, but this one is sort of halfway through the kind of series. So Pangolin, and can you all see that now?
Yes.
Great, here we go.
Everyone likes the scapegoat, especially when they've got a sore throat and an unrelenting cough. An unrelenting cough. Scapegoat sounds like an escaped goat, but in this case it is not. In this case it is not. In this case it's a pangolin down on Tor Abbey side. Scapegoating's full of shame. Scapegoating's full of shame. When we want to vent our despair, we really should take much more care. It's an easy way to blame. An easy way to blame. In this case, insert your own name.
Yeah.
Song. I was wondering, Hugh, how much your song was influenced by, we talked about them becoming sort of a little bit moodier. Was that, and so is the painting a bit moodier, but also I think as lockdown went on, it became a little bit kind of more depressing, didn't it? And
Yeah, I think that's true that certain things definitely did change. I mean, a friend of mine said, we love listening to your songs every morning and we like it when you do the spoken parts, which were the kind of sillier parts, and they gradually did get lost. And I think there was something, yes, the longer it went on, it became a little bit more, um, I suppose I became less jokey with it and it became more interesting. So that's why the series of songs for me, I just made a little CD of them. There's a definite journey from something that's kind of quite moderately frivolous and light and funny to something that's much darker. And I really like that when, you know, and I've had the privilege this morning with Rick of being in the gallery and seeing the pictures. And it's very lovely to be able to kind of see them and go on that kind of different journey.
Yeah.
Whereas for me, I had almost the opposite, because the first one I did was Lion, which is the penultimate piece, and the next one I did was Pangolin. And as I went through, actually the last one I did was the first one that Hugh had written. You know, the original Walk, the Kudu, was the last piece I did, and I left it specifically to the end so that as the first piece I could give it what I'd learned through the process, you know, and find a balance of what was going to be coming. So you get time within each of the pieces, the video pieces, you get time just to look at an aspect of the paintings, and because often there are 3 or 4 paintings in each of the pieces. You know, there's a lovely tiny portrait, for instance, of Berry Head in the rhinoceros one, which is just this tiny detail which nobody would ever look at in a way, but when you frame it, it's suddenly oh, it's this major thing. Lovely little landscape, and as I say, the aspect of these framings against the words, you know, but the frivolity, and allowing these different things to kind of have a tension between them, you know, allowing to just look and being able to point out these things, but also then bring in the words and be playful with the words and have these tensions just fight out a little bit, and then let it resolve, hopefully in some way.
Well, that's 1:45, and I've just had a message from Richard saying, can you stop at 1:45? And then another one saying, could you play one more piece of music, please?
That was before Bob chimed in. That's fine. I still think there's time. Can we?
I've got it lined up, which would be great. Which was the kind of last piece. Yeah.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Why don't you say something about it, Richard, while I'm just finding it, because you were the one who suggested to play it, weren't you?
Well, I think this is the one we linked to on the website, so some of you may have seen it, and I know Hugh told me off slightly because I referred to the piece and the lion as being melancholic. So I was accused of anthropomorphism, but actually I think cats can be, well, a lot of animals can be melancholic. So see what you think.
Here we go.
go there to see, and when you get there, it seems to have disappeared. What are you going to think? That it was just a trick? That there was nothing there? It was invented by Rick. How come we know it exists? Philosophically, if we just take someone's word as to what they've just seen. But now that everything's changed and things are not what they seem, Rick is my guiding light. I believe what he sees. I believe what he sees. I believe what he sees. Giraffes in the Spanish barn, gorillas on the railway, wildebeest on the cricket ground, a humpbacked whale in the bay, 3 camels and a baboon, flamingos in the fountains, a kudu in Cockington, and sightings of pangolins, rhinos grazing beneath, a cheetah up in a tree, impalas leap into the sea, elephants at Torabi. Imagine this menagerie. It's all that you need to do, and with Rick's pictures you see. I believe it is true. I believe it is true. I believe it is true.
Thank you. Okay, so see, we're only just a little bit later than, we don't have to finish at 2, but we probably will. So I'm going to just invite anyone. I know 1 or 2 people are having to drift off. We've had a few latecomers, so that balances out nicely. Does anyone have any questions for Hugh, or even for Bob and Rick, for that matter?
Richard, Emma has just asked an interesting question on the chat.
Okay, I know Emma's having to leave, but she's just leaving right now. Yeah, go on. So the question is, I wonder whether there will be evident a different attitude or experience of time in art created during this period. It's a good question. Could be for anybody to answer.
Can you say that again? Sorry.
Yeah, she said. So Emma said, I wonder whether there will be evident a different attitude or experience of time in art created during this period. I think many of our perceptions have changed for various reasons.
I think how important art is has been accentuated for me. Music, painting, film, everything. Yeah, how important it is to us, and how sad it is that, you know, the theatre has been suspended. And yeah, for example.
Tell us a bit more about how you're going to share this in a gallery setting, because galleries have changed a lot in what they can do and can't do, and you usually use that as a performance space, and I'm just curious to know what Tor Abbey will feel like with this work.
Well, in theory, you get to this exhibition at the end of your trip round the Abbey. No, not in theory, you do. You have to go around in a particular route and you get here. And it's true to say that if the next group is behind you a quarter of an hour later, you'll kind of be kicked out. So I think they've basically paced it such that if there aren't people behind, you can be in a space for a quarter of an hour. And I don't know how strictly that will be policed. But clearly you can't have more than 6 people in that space at one time. But as to whether you could go out and then come back in, I'm not sure. And it's a good point, because the film will be on, and the film lasts 50 minutes. If you're in the gallery, you won't get to see all of that film. You'll get to see a little bit of it. But we're hoping that we'll be able to put it online. Certainly we want to be able to find other ways to share it, which would be really great. But I suppose for us, what's really interesting about the exhibition is that, for me, you'll see these small pictures and be able to go and have a look at them, but then because of Bob's film, be able to see them magnified, be able to see that kind of brushwork in that way.
Yeah, I think it makes it a much more interesting exhibition than if it had only been the paintings. Having the songs and having the film, because of what you were saying earlier about it kind of drawing attention and focusing in on on the paintings. So that wouldn't have happened, would it, without lockdown? So in terms of an art exhibition, I think the whole thing has been made much more interesting for me anyway. I want to go down there now and watch the whole film, which I haven't seen yet, which I probably will do this afternoon.
If anybody has a question, just raise your hand and I'll moderate. But because it's a bit hard to do a free-for-all on Zoom. Anne, yeah. Hang on, you're unmuted. I'm going to unmute you because we can't hear you. Okay, go ahead.
Hi. First, I just wanted to say I really enjoyed the interaction of image, text, and music, and I think it did add. It became more than the sum of its parts.
Yep.
And the music I thought was very melodic. I found myself humming along. And I do have a question for Richard, because I don't know your work, and I see behind you some images that look nothing like the paintings of animals. And I'm wondering if you have a website or someplace where we can see a larger context of your work.
Yeah, sure. Probably the best place to see it is on my Instagram.
Okay.
I did at one stage try to have a website, but I wasn't technically minded enough to do that. But I do post my paintings on Instagram now, and my style is quite varied. I do paint abstract, like these paintings behind me, and I enjoy that. But I also enjoy painting people and landscapes and people in landscapes.
Thank you. I will take a look.
Thank you.
I think I found you, and I'm just I hope it's really you. It looks like it could be. I just put a link up on the chat there.
Oh yes, that's me.
Anyone else like to ask a question? I'd like to just say something.
She's got a question.
Oh, sorry, who had a question? Oh, right. Sorry. Martin, go ahead.
slightly to one side, this question. It's very encouraging to see a Huddersfield contingent. Whereabouts in Huddersfield do you come from? I'll ask that of you for a start.
Well, no, I don't come from Huddersfield. I lived in Marsh, Lindley, for 11 years.
Okay.
So that's where I lived.
And Bob, particularly with a name like Lockwood.
Well, yeah, I know. It's a complete. No, it's not a complete fluke. My grandfather was born in Ossett, so, but I was a child of the working classes. So my grandparents had moved from Glasgow, and other grandparents had moved from South Wales and Yorkshire. So I grew up in Reading, and then I moved up here. I met my wife at drama school, and moved up here. And I lived, about quarter of an hour, 20 minutes from where Hugh lived for 10 years or so. And now I live in Marsden. So there we go.
Oh, right. Did you know David Blackburn?
No.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Thanks, Frank.
Well, that sort of ties into my question or comment in a way that what strikes me about the relationship between the three of you is that this is a kind of collaboration that relies entirely on trust and knowledge of one another. You kind of know each other, you personally know each other's work, and there's a real sense of simply being able to hand over and say, do something with this, rather than, sitting in a room trying to work out how a collaboration might work. And I think that is quite a special thing. And so, Bob, when you were talking about as you continue to work on the video, you became more playful and more I'm trying to think of the right word. You took more risks, if you like. Took more, allowed yourself to go in there a bit more.
Yeah. I think particularly with the sort of the silliness end of things.
Yeah.
Because I think you're very safe when you're doing something that has an emotive end to it and is serious and has a certain quality to it. You can like I say, the Lion was the first piece that I did, and Hugh, and and in terms of Rick, I'm entirely on Hugh's coattails, because Rick didn't know me at all. This is the first time I've heard Rick speak. We've only emailed each other, and it's entirely on the basis of mine and Hugh's working relationship of the historically, that I'm part of this. And there was an aspect of, is this okay? You sure you want me to do this to your work?
I suppose if I'd given you some kind of negative reaction, like, what the hell do you think you're doing, putting writing all over my painting? You might not have carried on with the whole project, but yeah, you might not have entered into the spirit of it in the way that you did. I mean, personally speaking, I was just honoured, to have A, the songs, and B, the film made about my paintings. So thank you, you and Bob.
Yeah, I think, Richard, your question is interesting, because Bob and I know each other very well, but I didn't know Rick very well at the beginning of this project.
Okay, I didn't know that. So.
Rick had been, I was running a community choir in Torquay for 4 or 5 years, and Rick joined it towards the end of its life. So I got to know him through that. But actually, it was only really during, when he posted this picture, and then I responded to it, and then suddenly a relationship emerged. But I think what you say about just letting other people do what they want with your artwork, being able to do that is an interesting thing, isn't it? That I've also been making an album during this process, and that's at times been much more difficult, because someone does something, and especially when we can't communicate with each other being in the same room, someone does something to your sound world that you were not expecting at all, and it really shocks you, and you you know, you have to kind of go back, and that's much more difficult. So it has felt on this particular occasion that the three of us are very happy just to let whatever happens happen to the material, because it kind of seems to be emphasizing the elements of it rather than detracting, I suppose.
Great. Well, I think unless anyone else would like to chip in. Okay, no hands waving. Yes, you.
We just, I don't think, because I've seen Emma's returned now. She's
back, yes.
I don't really think we've answered her question at all.
No, we haven't, it's true.
But, you know, the question about, you know, will we have experienced a different time, the perception of kind of time in art, which I think, I mean, it's very hard to be able to tell at this particular stage, isn't it? But I don't know whether anyone else, and I don't mean just me, Rick and Bob, whether anyone else has got an answer to that, because I think it's a very provocative question.
I'd like to just chip something in, if I may, briefly.
Yeah.
I'm one of the latecomers. I think time, in the sense of how we perceive time, obviously has been a huge factor here, because I think sometimes people have felt like they were in a vacuum when they were in lockdown, and that vacuum would feel endless. And that's going to have a big impact on how one moves about their processes, whether they be making art or whether they be gardening. It's going to have, you know, because there's this sense of groundlessness. And I think that maybe is where that question was going. And of course, I've seen work already by various people that definitely hints, well, more than hints at that. A real sense of a sort of a tunnel with no not in a negative sense, just an endless, eternal sense. And I think people who maybe aren't spiritual, that might have been a very new concept. I'll leave it there. I could say so much more.
I think that's fair, Claire. I think you know, I think there was a very curious sense of drift when lockdown began, and I know from conversations we've had previously on this first Friday group that a lot of people found it a very positive experience at the beginning. And I think in time that did begin to change, and I think particularly artists and performers who are used to working to intense deadlines suddenly found that they weren't. There was nobody looking at their work. There was nobody. There were no pressures. There were no deadlines, and I think it has caused some quite fundamental shifts in the way people work. Actually, in some cases. Yeah, Martin.
Yes, all I was going to add was when the lockdown happened, it felt like a suspension of time, but with a lot of benefits somehow. Because a lot of space opened up for people who, under normal life circumstances, don't have the ability to do that and reflect. And it also somehow opened up the natural world more. Since then, I think, personally for me, the sense is that time has actually stood still. And that I find very unnerving.
Yeah, I think just from my perspective as well, what Claire just asked and how you responded, Richard. So for me as a performer, it's interesting coming back to these songs because they've never been performed and they haven't had a kind of end product until now. Whereas normally in the past, I'd write a song, we'd rehearse it with the band, and the next week we'd perform it. It was a kind of ending. Whereas this idea of the tunnel thing, it's just like, oh yeah, it hasn't quite finished yet. There's been no kind of result. So I know that Rick's feeling that because there he is with his dog Otis, who featured on the Pangolin song, by the way. That there's suddenly an end product, and it's been very exciting for Rick, you know, because suddenly there is one, and it's been very rare in that time. So I think you're right. They're having that tunnel of just kind of going without any.
And And can I just dive in and just say something that just struck me as you spoke there, Hugh? It's almost like the question of how important is it really to have this end product, this sense of audience, this sense of being observed? How important, and I know this is a question, obviously, of a bit of a philosophical bend and will have been asked no doubt before, but I'm just throwing it out here now. How important is it for us to be, to be seen? Do we have to have that to feel complete?
I think we do.
I think it's a nice kind of add-on at the end, but in terms of the actual creation of the piece, I don't think it's important at all.
No.
Sorry, Rick. Carry on.
And I think lockdown has had quite an important kind of influence on certainly my work, and I think probably Hugh's as well, in the sense that, you know, we're stuck indoors. What the hell else are we going to do with our time? And okay, let's be expressive, and maybe, you know, we express things in a different way and in a less inhibited way than we would have done normally when there's other pressures on our time to be going out, you know, shop or whatever.
I think that's a really interesting question there about end product, because I've produced a lot of residencies where we have at the outset said, or I've even been involved in residencies too at the outset, where it's been said there is no pressure to make a piece of work during this residency. There is no pressure to show anything.
Mm-hmm.
This is about process. So it might be a week, it might be a month, whatever it is. In 95% of cases, people want to show something. So I think that desire to sort of to round out a process by some form of expression, whether it's considered to be a finished work or not. I think that desire to share work and to wrap it in a way that feels like you've reached a landing stage feels quite important to me.
Yeah, I think there's a thing about communicating discoveries. Certainly, that's American theatre director that I worked with always talked about rehearsal as the place where you go to discover things, and the performance is where you share those discoveries. And I think having somebody reflect your discoveries back to you in response to a piece of work is really valuable.
I certainly never thought that I would have a show, but in fact, I mean, what one of the main things that inspired me to do another painting was that I wanted to hear another song. I better keep going with it.
Yeah.
I remember talking to you about, you know, where to end. You know, are we going to be able to? We should draw a halt at this point, didn't we, Hugh?
Yeah.
And
You'll never run out of animals.
Yeah.
No, but we ran out of keys.
This is true. Well, there's many more modes I'm sure you can access.
Yeah.
I think we will, as usual, we've opened up a really interesting question right at the end of the session, but I just want to say thank you, and if we can say thanks as well to Hugh and Rick and Bob. And yeah, thanks for joining us, and it's really great to see some new faces. We will put up on the website, we'll put this up, we'll also make sure you've got links to the film, which I think is now available. Is that right?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, well, when it does become available, we will let you know. If you are within striking distance of Torquay, go to Tor Abbey, see the work there. If you can book, you have to book a space. Is that right?
Yeah, you have to book.
Yeah, you have to book a space. Yeah, come again. Thank you for joining us. And
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
great to have you.
Much.
Okay.
Right.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Bye.